I remember the day with startling clarity. The day I decided that enough was enough. It was a crisp autumn morning, and the leaves were just beginning to turn, casting a kaleidoscope of colors across the sidewalks. As I watched the last of our children drive away to college, a strange mix of emotions welled up inside me: relief and guilt, freedom and fear, but most of all, a profound sense of finality. I knew then that I would file for divorce that very week. But let me take you back to the beginning, to a time when the world seemed full of possibilities and my heart was brimming with youthful certainty. I was 18, barely out of high school, and convinced that I had life all figured out. My father, a man of few words but infinite wisdom, pulled me aside one evening. He looked at me with those steady eyes of his and said, "Son, love is important, but so is knowing who you are and what you want in life." I nodded, eager to dismiss his advice, my mind already made up. I was in love after all, head over heels, and nothing was going to stand in my way. She was my high school sweetheart, and to my 18-year-old self, she was the center of the universe. We got married in a small ceremony surrounded by friends and family. I was ecstatic, convinced that we could conquer the world together. We found jobs, settled into a modest apartment, and before long, we had two beautiful children. The joys of fatherhood were unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Holding my children for the first time, I felt a fierce protectiveness and love that I hadn't known was possible. Yet, as the years rolled by, the fault lines in our marriage began to widen. It wasn't any one thing, but a series of small, seemingly inconsequential decisions that slowly drove a wedge between us. Her family was always present, always there to lend a hand or offer advice, and while I was grateful for their support, it soon became apparent that they were the ones steering the ship. Holidays were spent at their home, birthday parties were hosted by her parents, and my own family was increasingly sidelined, relegated to the role of distant spectators in our lives. I tried to voice my concerns, but my words seemed to vanish into thin air. My opinions were brushed aside, my preferences dismissed. I felt like a ghost in my own home, present but invisible. Our bedroom, the one place I hoped could be a sanctuary, was never my own. The door was always open, literally and metaphorically, and my attempts to lock it, to claim a small piece of privacy, were met with resistance. "It stresses the kids out," she'd say, as if my need for space was somehow unreasonable or selfish. Looking back, I wonder how I endured it for so long. A full 20 years of marriage, and yet I felt like an outsider, a guest in my own life. The turning point came gradually, like a slow awakening. The arguments that had once been infrequent and easily resolved became more frequent, more heated, more painful. I suggested counseling, hoping that a third party might help bridge the chasm that had grown between us. But she dismissed the idea, insisting that we were fine, that things would get better on their own. The years passed, and with them, so did my hope for change. I remember one particularly harsh winter when our dog, my closest companion, passed away. The loss hit me harder than I expected, and in my grief, I realized that I couldn't bear to bring another pet into our home. Not because I didn't want one, but because I knew that even that small joy would be claimed by her in the event of a divorce. It was a sobering realization, one that left me feeling more alone than ever. As our children grew older, I found solace in the knowledge that they were thriving. They were happy, well adjusted, and deeply loved, and for a long time, that was enough to keep me going. But as they prepared to leave for college, I began to reevaluate my life, to question what I wanted, what I needed, and the answer was clear. I wanted out. I wanted a chance to find happiness, to live a life that wasn't defined by someone else's expectations. The day I filed for divorce was both exhilarating and terrifying. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to leap into the unknown. There were no assets to divide, no lengthy battles over property, just a clean break, as clean as it could be after so many years together. I walked away with nothing but the clothes on my back, and the knowledge that my children, though they loved me, saw my family as little more than an afterthought. My ex-wife claimed to be blindsided. though I struggled to understand how that could be. Had she truly not noticed the strain in our relationship, the endless arguments, the repeated pleas for counseling? I asked her these questions, but her answers were unsatisfying, evasive. It was as if she'd been living in a parallel universe, one where our marriage was still strong, where our problems were minor hiccups rather than insurmountable obstacles. Starting over at 41 was daunting, but liberating. I found a new job quickly, one that paid better and allowed me the freedom to explore new opportunities. I moved to a different city, embraced the night shift, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own destiny. I adopted a rescue dog, a loyal companion who brought joy and companionship to my life. Walking him through the neighborhood, I met new friends, discovered new passions, and began to build a life that was truly my own. My ex wife and children, however, were not so understanding. They saw my departure as an abandonment, a betrayal. Her family was vocal in their disapproval, labeling me the villain in our story. I tried to explain my side, to make them understand the years of unhappiness, the countless conversations that had gone unheard. But it was like speaking into a void, my words bouncing back to me without effect. Despite the criticism, I began to date again. Shelley, a 32-year-old teacher, entered my life like a breath of fresh air. Unencumbered by the baggage of a previous marriage, she was kind, understanding, and full of life. We took things slow, enjoying one another's company without pressure or expectation. Meeting her friends, being invited to her Easter gathering, it felt like a new chapter, one filled with possibilities. And yet, the echoes of my past lingered. My children, now adults, remained distant, their allegiance firmly with their mother. I understood their perspective, even if it pained me. They saw my decision as a selfish act, a disruption of the family unit they'd known their entire lives. I wished I could make them see that it was a choice made not out of selfishness, but out of a desperate need for self-preservation. In moments of quiet reflection, I questioned my actions, wondered if I could have done things differently. But deep down, I knew that staying would have meant sacrificing my happiness, my sense of self. I had given my marriage everything I had. And when that wasn't enough, I realized I had to give myself a chance at a better life. So here I am, forging a new path, one step at a time. It's not always easy, and the shadows of my decisions sometimes loom large. But I'm learning to embrace the uncertainty, to find joy in the small moments, and to let go of the guilt that once weighed so heavily on my shoulders. Life is unpredictable, full of twists and turns. But for the first time in a long time, I'm excited to see where it leads. And while the road ahead may be uncharted, I'm ready to face whatever comes my way. As I navigated through this new phase of life, I found myself experiencing emotions that I hadn't felt in years. There was a mix of vulnerability and exhilaration, a potent cocktail that came with stepping out of a long, entrenched routine and into the unknown. I remember one quiet evening, sitting on my small balcony with a mug of coffee, my rescue dog curled up at my feet. The city lights twinkled in the distance, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't just about being free from a marriage that had become a prison. It was about rediscovering who I was outside the roles of husband and father. I realized that over the years, I had lost touch with the things that once brought me joy. Music, for instance, had been a huge part of my life before marriage. I used to lose myself in the melodies, letting the rhythms guide me to a place of solace. But somewhere along the line, I had stopped listening, stopped playing. Now, I dusted off my old guitar, fingers rusty at first, but gradually remembering the chords that had once been second nature. Shelley encouraged this revival of old passions. She would listen with genuine interest, her eyes alight with curiosity as I shared stories of the band I'd played in during college, or the time I spontaneously joined a street musician for an impromptu duet. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself smiling more, laughing more, feeling lighter than I had in years. Yet, amidst the lightness, there were shadows that lingered. My children's distance was a constant ache, a reminder of the family I had left behind. I reached out to them, sending messages that were sometimes met with silence or terse replies. It was hard not to take it personally, not to feel like I was a stranger in their lives. I tried to remind myself that healing takes time, and that maybe one day they would understand why I had to leave. The reactions from others, too, were a mixed bag. While some of my old friends reached out with support, others sided with my ex wife, painting me as the villain who had upended a stable family dynamic. It was frustrating, feeling like my side of the story was overshadowed by a narrative that cast me in a negative light. But I had to remind myself that the truth was complex and not everyone would take the time to see it from all angles. One weekend, Shelley suggested we take a short trip out of the city. She knew a quiet little town by the coast, a place where the air smelled of salt, and the pace of life was slower. We rented a small cottage overlooking the sea, and those few days were like balm to my soul. The waves crashing against the shore, the endless horizon. It made my problems seem smaller, more manageable. We spent our days exploring the town, tasting fresh seafood, and simply enjoying each other's company. It was a reminder that life was still full of beauty and potential, even after so much upheaval. On one of those coastal evenings, as we watched the sun dip below the horizon, Shelley turned to me, her expression serious yet gentle. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the sound of the sea. I considered her question carefully. It was one I had asked myself countless times. There are moments, I admitted. I miss my kids and I wish it hadn't come to this. But I don't regret choosing to be true to myself. I needed to break free to find out who I could be on my own. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I think that's brave," she said, her hand finding mine. And in that moment, I felt a warmth spread through me, a reassurance that I was on the right path, even if it was a rocky one. As the weeks turned into months, I continued to build my life piece by piece. My job was demanding but rewarding, offering opportunities I'd never had before. I found a rhythm in my new normal, a balance between work and play, solitude and socializing. The dog park became a regular haunt, a place where I met other dog owners and forged new friendships. These connections, though new, were genuine and refreshing, reminding me that I was not alone in this world. Family, however, remained a complicated aspect of my life. My parents, though supportive, had their own reservations about the divorce. They worried about the impact on my children, on the family ties that had already been strained. I visited them occasionally, trying to bridge the gap that had widened over the years. It was a slow process, but I hoped that time would heal these wounds too. As for my ex wife, our communication was minimal, limited to necessary discussions about our children. There was bitterness on both sides, an undercurrent of unresolved tension that seemed insurmountable. I wished it could be different, that we could find a way to coexist peacefully despite everything. But I knew that would take time, perhaps more time than either of us was ready to give. In moments of doubt, I turned to Shelley, whose presence in my life was a constant source of comfort. Her optimism and zest for life were infectious, and she encouraged me to keep moving forward, to focus on the future rather than dwell on the past. With her by my side, I dared to dream again, to imagine a life full of possibilities. And so, I continued to write my own story, one day at a time. The road ahead was still uncertain, but with each step, I felt more grounded, more sure of who I was and who I wanted to be. Life, in all its unpredictability, was an adventure waiting to be lived. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to embrace it, with all its highs and lows, joys and challenges. As I navigated this new chapter, I often found myself reflecting on the choices that had brought me here. There were times when the weight of the past bore down on me, the memories of family gatherings, of laughter shared, and dreams once held dear. I remembered the early days of my marriage, when the world seemed full of promise, and the love we shared was enough to fill any room. Those were the memories that haunted me, the ones that whispered in the quiet moments, asking if things could have been different. But in those moments of reflection, I also found clarity. I realized that the love I had once felt had slowly but surely been suffocated by the boundaries that were placed around me, the walls that had been built brick by brick over the years. It was the realization that sometimes love isn't enough to sustain a relationship when respect, understanding, and shared goals are absent. The echoes of my past life occasionally reached into my new one, usually through well meaning but misguided words from acquaintances who didn't know the full story. I remember one particular conversation with an old colleague who, upon learning of my divorce, remarked with a hint of judgment, "You seemed like such a happy family." It was an innocent comment, but it stung nonetheless. A reminder of the facade that had been so carefully maintained for so long. I wanted to explain, to tell him how appearances can be deceiving, how there was so much more beneath the surface. But instead, I simply nodded and offered a non committal smile, acknowledging that this was yet another situation where the truth was too complex for a casual exchange. It underscored the lesson I had been learning, that everyone carries their own burdens, their own hidden stories that may never be fully understood by others. Through it all, I remained committed to building bridges with my children. I knew it wouldn't be easy, and I tried to approach it with patience and persistence. I sent them small tokens of my affection, a book I thought they might enjoy, a postcard from a place I'd visited, or a message simply saying I was thinking of them. Each gesture was a hope, a wish sent into the ether that maybe, one day, they would reach back. With each passing day, I found solace in the small things, the minutiae of everyday life that I had once overlooked. The simple pleasure of a hot cup of coffee in the morning, the warmth of the sun on my face during a midday walk with my dog, the satisfaction of completing a project at work. Life was not the grand, sweeping narrative I had once imagined, but a collection of these small moments, each one a building block toward a new beginning. Shelley and I continued to grow closer, our relationship deepening as we shared more of our lives with each other. She introduced me to her world, and I did the same, inviting her into the spaces that were uniquely mine. We spent evenings cooking together, trying out recipes that blended our different backgrounds, finding joy in the fusion of flavors and cultures. One evening, as we sat together on my small balcony, the city lights twinkling below us, Shelley turned to me with a smile. "You know," she said, her eyes reflecting the stars above, "I've never felt more at home than I do when I'm with you." Her words touched something deep within me, a part that had longed for connection, for belonging. I realized then that home wasn't a place, but a feeling, a sense of peace and acceptance that came from being with those who truly saw you, flaws and all. In the midst of this newfound happiness, there remained the ever present challenge of co parenting from afar. My ex wife and I had yet to find a rhythm, a way to communicate that didn't devolve into old habits and unresolved grievances. But I held on to hope, believing that with time, we might find a way to work together for the sake of our children. As the seasons changed, so too did my perspective. I began to see my past not as a series of missteps, but as a journey that had led me to where I was meant to be. Each twist and turn, each joy and sorrow had shaped me, teaching me resilience, empathy, and the importance of staying true to oneself. I knew there were still challenges ahead, relationships to mend, and new paths to forge. But for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face them, armed with the knowledge that I had the strength and support to carry me forward. Life was an intricate tapestry, and I was learning to appreciate the beauty in its imperfections, the way each thread contributed to the whole. And so, I continued to embrace this new chapter, writing it with intention and openness, hopeful for what the future might bring. The road was long, but it was mine, and I was determined to walk it with courage and grace. As the months rolled by, the landscape of my life continued to shift, each day bringing with it new lessons and realizations. In the quiet moments of solitude, I often found myself reflecting on the nature of happiness and what it truly meant to me. It was a concept that had eluded me for so long, hidden beneath layers of compromise and unmet expectations. In the past, I had equated happiness with fulfilling my role as a husband and father, but those roles had been defined by others' expectations rather than my own. Now, I was learning to define happiness on my own terms, It was no longer about grand gestures or achieving societal milestones. Instead, it was about the simple joys of life, the moments that brought genuine contentment. A morning run with my dog, a heartfelt conversation with Shelley, or the satisfaction of a job well done. Yet, amidst this newfound clarity, I couldn't escape the lingering shadows of my past. The echoes of my marriage, the unresolved tensions with my children, and the estrangement from my ex wife's family occasionally resurfaced, casting doubt over my decisions. I questioned whether I could have handled things differently, if perhaps there had been a path where I could have reached the same place of self discovery without the pain of a broken family. But those thoughts, though persistent, were gradually losing their hold on me. With each passing day, I was learning to forgive myself for the choices I had made. I reminded myself that every decision, every step I had taken, was driven by a desire to find peace and authenticity in my life, a desire that had long been suppressed under the weight of marital discord. One afternoon, as I sat in a bustling cafe, sipping my coffee and watching the world go by, a wave of understanding washed over me. It was as if I had crossed an invisible threshold, one where the past no longer held the power to define me. I realized that the true measure of my journey lay not in the mistakes I had made, but in the courage it had taken to acknowledge them and to seek a life that resonated with my true self. This sense of liberation was mirrored in my interactions with Shelley, who had become an anchor in my life, a source of unwavering support and understanding. Our relationship was built on mutual respect, a willingness to communicate openly, and a shared appreciation for life's simple pleasures. It was the kind of partnership I had always yearned for, one where I felt seen and valued for who I was. Shelley's presence in my life brought with it a sense of belonging that I hadn't experienced in years. With her, I found a kind of homecoming, a return to a place of warmth and acceptance that I had thought lost to me. It was a reminder that love, in its purest form, was about lifting each other up, celebrating the individuality that each partner brought to the table. Despite the joy I found in my new life, the ongoing challenge of reconnecting with my children remained. Our relationship was still tentative, marked by awkward phone calls and stilted conversations. I knew that rebuilding the trust that had been eroded over the years would take time and patience. It was a slow process, but one that I was committed to, driven by the hope that one day we could move beyond the past and forge a new bond. In moments of doubt, I would often revisit the letters I had penned to each of them, letters that spoke of my love and hopes for their futures. They were reminders of my intentions and the desire to be present in their lives, despite the physical distance that separated us. I clung to the belief that in time, they would come to see the sincerity of my efforts and recognize the love that had always been there, even when obscured by the tumult of family dynamics. As the tapestry of my life continued to unfold, I found myself embracing the journey with a sense of wonder and gratitude. The challenges and triumphs, the heartaches and joys, all of it was part of the story I was living, a story that was uniquely mine. It was a journey that required courage and resilience, but one that also promised growth and fulfillment. In the quiet moments of introspection, I knew that I was on the right path. I had stepped into a new chapter with an open heart, ready to face the unknown with grace and determination. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was also filled with possibility, a testament to the power of starting over and the beauty of embracing one's true self. And so, I continued to move forward, one step at a time, guided by the knowledge that I was living authentically, in a way that honored my values and aspirations. It was a journey that was far from over, but one that I was committed to, confident in the understanding that I was exactly where I needed to be. Subscribe for more stories.